pastor study on July the 2nd, 1960, and I'm very, very delighted to have in the study Mr. and Mrs. John Jester of Franklinville. Brother Jester's come up today to place the cornerstones in the educational building, the cornerstone that was dedicated on the day of Memorial Day, our Centennial Day, and it is here, and today Brother Jester is going to place it in. And I remember several years ago, when Brother Jester and I worked together on building some Sunday school rooms in the back of the old Hickory Chapel Church. As I recall, that was about 1935. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
I remember. Now tell us anything you can think of that you'd like to put on record.
Well, to put on record, going with the building of the building and the repairs, I helped change the door from the south end of the building to the north, I believe it is, way back in around 1912, somewhere there. And it's not much that I can say, and there's a lot that I know and remember, but then on the spur of the moment, it's hard for me to think of. And Brother Buck just said, yes, I was here when he come in Sunday school. He was the teacher, and we worked together just numbers of the times and places.
Brother Jester, tell me who the first pastor that you can remember, and some of the earlier pastors.
Well, I can remember Hawkins and Harstow as being pastors here, Mr. Pierce, and, all from then on down. And Brother Jones, I believe, was the longest of any of them here.
I think so.
And, my father, mother, my aunt, and Susan Austin, I remember when they was around. We all had awful good times in this church, and I was converted in there, and I have said that I was practically born in one corner of it, but I think that was just say-so.
Well, thank you, Brother Jester.
Thank you, Mr.
I know how these microphones scare me. You never get used to them. But we do appreciate you and appreciate you coming up today to put this in.
I always love to come to Hickory and love to be back at home. We feel at home. Glad to know that we were able to be here this morning and to know that the good Lord has been so good to us.
So thank the Lord.
He spared our lives and all our children, and we want them all to do the very best they can and live for the Lord. And we'll have a meeting someday in heaven.
Thank you, Sister Jester, and I appreciate your words. It certainly goes to show that the glory of God has rested upon Hickory Chapel in the years that have gone, and I know He is blessing us now. In 1960, in the pastor's study again, and I have in the study this morning a friend of the church in Mr. J.P. Boulton. Mr. Boulton has a record, I feel, of knowledge of Hickory Chapel Church and its activities that extend back probably farther than anyone else. There is one in our community who is a little his senior, and I hope to get his testimony on this, but right now I'm glad to have in my study my good friend J.T. Boulton, sometimes called Boss Boulton. And I'm going to ask him to take over and tell us just whatever will come to his mind and tell us some things that took place in his recollection here at the church. And as he has talked to me, I'm sure that those things will be of interest to all of you who may listen to this or who may read the records in the years to come. All right, Mr. Bolt.
What do I remember about Bundy's Chapel? Well, to start with, the first thing I remember about Bundy's Chapel, about 75 years ago, my oldest brother, Edward, and my sisters, Rosie and Marcy, were attending church there one night. As we lived in sight of Bundy's Chapel, my mother looked out and saw the house on fire. It scared her very much. I don't know how they got the fire out, but I think Bill Witcher got on top of the house and tore the shingles off and got it put out. Then I attended Bundy's Chapel Sunday School when I was a small boy. I was there at picnics and singing. A fellow by the name of Mr. Leonard had some old-fashioned singing classes there when I was just a boy. My older sisters and brother attended. I was too young. The pastors at that time, as well as I remember, was a Mr. W.W. Folger, I think was his missus, and some Kirks, Mr. Rachel Kirk and Miss Annie Kirk. The members of that church then was the Kids, the Witchers, the Jesters, and the Swains. Mrs. Susan Hudson was my Sunday school teacher most of the time. Mr. Ab Houghton was my teacher part of the time. He died, as well as I remember, about 1891. Then about the cemetery here at Hickory Chapel, I remember mighty well when the person was buried. It was Charlie Witcher, the son of William and Witcher and his wife. He was buried here in March, I don't remember the day, 1894. That was the first funeral at Hickory Chapel. The second was Rufus McGee. He was the son of Windburn and Fanny McGee. He was buried here in February 1895. And his sister died in about 3 weeks after. She was buried the third one. I do not recall the fourth one. I wasn't here at Charlie Witcher's funeral, but my mother and father was. They wanted me to stay at home and plow, and I did. I was here at Rufus McGee's funeral. They asked me about my record in Sunday school. My first Sunday on this record was the first Sunday in the year 1933. The Sunday was the first day of the year, the first day of the month, and the first day of the week, and I started that day to tending regular. I've been tending before, but not every Sunday. I haven't missed a Sunday since. If I finish this year, it will be 28 years. They sold Old Bundy's Chapel in 1892. And they bought this first acre of ground here at Hickory Chapel on December the 18th, 1892, of James Snyder. And they started the church here in 1891, they bought the land, December the 18th. And then the next spring they started this church. Then the sold old Bundy Chapel Church to shoot kids. He bought it, the building, and moved it, and built him a dwelling house out of it. And William Spoon bought the acre of land there that old Bundy Chapel stood on. The National Highway now goes right under. There's a cut there. As well as I remember, it goes right under where old Bundy Chapel stood. Well, I don't know what the year. The pastor of this church from outside of Sunday school was Reverend E.W. Jones. He left and Mr. Boulton came, as well as I remember. And when Mr. Boulton left, Mr. D.C. Stone came. And I think after Mr. D.C. Stone, Mr. Carl Hill.
Paul Hill.
Paul Hill. Mr. Paul Hill came.
Then
Mr. Hill.
Falk. Walter Falk. W.N. Falk.
Yeah, Mr. Falk. And after him, who was next? You remember?
I don't remember right at the minute, but I just don't recall, but I think that's been mentioned anyway. And we appreciate this wonderful information.
Then Mr.
Thank you for this good information, and there are a few other questions I'd like to ask you and have you tell me something about them. You mentioned the fact that you remember the second funeral and who it was preached by, and that it is my understanding, and more than that, my knowledge, that you bought the bell and the present clock that's being used in the Sunday school department out here, and also the pulpit Bible, and that wonderful, large, beautiful picture of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. If you'll ask me those questions, I sure will appreciate it.
Mr. Burke is asking me the question when I purchased the bell. I purchased the bell in memory of my brother, C. Edward Boulton, in the fall of 1924. He also wants the date when I purchased the clock. Preacher Jones and myself put up that clock December the 18th, 1925. He also wants to know about the Bible. The Bible was purchased in 26. Then the picture of Christ, he wants to know about that. About 5 years ago, I gave, I don't remember the name, $100 to paint that picture. He also wants to know who preached Rufus McGee's funeral, the second funeral that was preached at Hickory Chapel. It was preached by W. Coon. At that time, he was school teacher at Union Hill School.
Thank you so very much. I think that's a good record for the clock. This clock has been out there for 35 years, and the bell has been up there for a year longer than that. And I remember so well when you put the beautiful picture of Christ here in the church, which will be a lasting memory to you and The Bible that he gave in those days is still here on my desk. It's been in my filing cabinet or book cabinet for some years since I've been pastor here. It is too large, and not too large a Bible, but it's too large for the present pulpit, and that's the reason we have not been using it up there. Thank you again, my good friend, and may the Lord really bless you.